Alan Wake 2. We need to talk about it. During the 2021 Game Awards, a whole buttload of trailers were shown, but one in particular stood out to me more than the rest. And as you can tell already, yeah, I'm talking about Alan Wake 2. It's not that I'm just overly excited for getting a sequel, which obviously I am, but the thing that really started to get me to beat my chest like a Neanderthal was what Sam Lake, its writer, said after its reveal.
This is going to be Remedy's first ever survival horror game. Ooh.
Now, a couple things before we get this video started. One, I can't actually talk about Alan Wake without having a cup of coffee. That's basically the law. And two, just to set a precedence up front of what you should expect from this video, a lot of it's gonna be me regaling my excitement for this announcement, but also try to explain why Alan Wake's return actually makes a whole lot of sense right now. Now we can continue. Going back to the whole full-fledged survival horror thing that Sam Lake.
Survival horror game.
That Sam Lake mentioned. And that's an incredibly exciting prospect for Alan Wake 2. But in order to understand why, let's talk about the rocky development of Alan Wake 1 for a second. The first Alan Wake went through a long and treacherous development cycle, having gone through several iterations before becoming what we know today as Alan Wake. And at one point, it was supposed to be an open-world survival horror game with a day and night cycle, which tasked Alan to prep during the day to face the shadowy figures at night. Until, like many development cycles go, the game was scaled back and parts were cut, and it became a fairly more linear action horror game rather than a big open world one. Which is interesting to think about because Alan Wake 1 does have quite expansive areas where you're driving through parts of Bright Falls, and it's almost like you can see like glimmers of stuff they developed for an open world game that they just kind of scaled down into that game. Just a thought. It's interesting. That's all I'm saying. Another thing that's kind of interesting to think about is at the time of which Alan Wake came out, survival horror was, well, rather kind of on the back end of existence. Like, the genre as a whole had taken a turn in for a more action-oriented focus, due in part to games like Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5. Not that I'm implying that's why Alan Wake became the way it did instead of becoming an open-world survival horror game, but considering the trend and what was mainstream at the time, I'm not surprised it took the more action-oriented route, especially considering that Remedy Entertainment was coming off the tail end of Max Payne success. So that's it. But aside from me being a survival horror nerd as well as a big old Remedy Entertainment nerd, hearing Sam Lake say that they're gonna go full-fledged survival horror with this upcoming sequel just means that it feels like it's going to be embodying what they had intended it to be in the first place. Which, by the way, again, is not discounting what the game is, what the first one is in its current state. It's just, there's something magical. That's the only word that's coming ahead to my mind. Magical. Does that even make sense? Am I making sense? My rambling excitement aside, I do want to talk about why I think it makes sense for Alan Wake to return now. If you finish the first game, you would know that it ends with a big old cliffhanger that kind of, in my opinion, ends at a satisfying conclusion, but satisfying in the horrific way like Twilight Zone or the second season of Twin Peaks does. Now, going back to that cliffhanger, the game was always developed with a sequel in mind, which Sam Lake just wrote in a blog post for PlayStation Europe announcing Alan Wake 2. And while following it up with a sequel immediately didn't quite come to fruition the way Remedy had intended it to. Instead of getting Alan Wake 2, we got the campy sci-fi pseudo-TV show game Quantum Break, which, by the way, I unabashedly had a great time with, even though I can't remember what the plot is at all, but that's besides the point. Overall, however, Quantum Break just felt detached from the identity that Remedy had established for itself from both Max Payne and Alan Wake. Those games featured surreal, dreamy horrors and quirky in-game universes that gave their seriousness and darkness levity. And those elements were pretty much completely absent from Quantum Break. That game as a whole felt far more safe, which is why its follow-up, Control, feels like a gift from the gods of Asgard. That construction has been going on for several weeks, and it makes me want to punch myself in the face every single time I'm filming. Here we are. That's not a gift from the gods of Asgard. That is a demon infiltrating whatever. Control wasn't just a return to Remedy's roots. It was the defining display of everything that Studio had attempted. It had inventive action, technical and graphical prowess, surrealistic storytelling, and top-tier world building. It was also the defining turn for the Remedy connected universe, as it acknowledges Alan Wake and the dark place in which he is trapped. Of course, if you play the Control DLC AWE, it's pretty obvious that a sequel was on the way. And with the recent release of the Alan Wake remaster, the reveal at the Game Awards should really come as no surprise. Is it going to be open world like their initial vision? I don't know, and anything I say at this point is just going to be armchair speculation and backseat game design anyways. But by looking at what they did with Control and how they've innovated genres in the past, I cannot wait to see what they're going to do with quite possibly my favorite genre,
survival horror game.
Ooh.
It's been over a decade since the first Alan Wake, and yet here we are, and all the pieces are in place for his grand return. But of course, we'll have to wait and see how this whole thing pans out in 2023. God, that is so long from now. What am I gonna do? It's fine. Hellblade 2 is coming out. That's something to look forward to.